الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. All praise due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on His last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and on all those who follow the path of righteousness until the last day. As you've heard, the topic that was chosen for me was culture and authentic Islam. In terms of the future for Muslims in this land, in all lands where Muslims are minorities, as well as in all lands where Muslims are majorities, we have this challenge of culture versus authentic Islam. Because culture has become, to a large degree, a substitute for Islam in many parts of the Muslim world today. And it has also caused a lot of misunderstanding which exists in the world, in the non-Muslim world, with regards to Islam. And it's not to say that it is the only source of misunderstanding, misinformation, distorted information about Islam, because we know there are those, especially in the media, who deliberately seek to distort the true image of Islam to the world. However, as a basic starting point for ourselves here in Toronto, Canada, where today Muslims are struggling to survive, and you have already heard some introduction to the struggles that this generation is facing. When we realize that there were generations before. For many of us, it seems as though we are the first generation. However, there were waves of immigrants who came here in the 50 years before, 100 years before, have come to this country. And if you go to places like Alberta, Calgary, Edmonton, you will find there John Muhammad and Mary Ahmed and other such names, indicating that somewhere along the line there were some Muslims out there. And when you speak to them, they say, yes, my grandfather, yeah, he was a Muslim. But they're not. There's a generation that was lost. Very few survivors. And they were followed by others And those others were followed by us. And to a large degree, we are repeating much of what they went through, having not learned from their experience. We repeat the same things that they did. There has to come a point in time when we have to honestly and realistically look at our situation and tackle the problems, correct these problems so that we can move forward. So among the problematic areas is this area of culture. Actually, we as Muslims here in Toronto, in Abu Huraira Masjid, and other masjids of Toronto, to a large degree, we represent a unique gathering of Muslims. A unique gathering of Muslims, which normally only occurs outside of these areas during Hajj. Where Muslims from all parts of the different areas in which Muslims live come together in Mecca to worship Allah. This unique circumstance, we are actually living here. And technically speaking, we should be the example to the rest of the Muslim world. That's what we should be. An example to the rest of the Muslim world. A good example of the power of Islam. Because we all come from countries which are, for the most part, Muslim countries, where back home, everybody else is just like us. We don't find back home, whether it's Egypt, it's Pakistan, it's India, it's Malaysia, Indonesia, we don't find this kind of a mixture. We belong to one culture, and we do certain things in special ways, which Muslims in other parts of the world don't. So we have come here from cultures which have been homogeneous cultures, where everybody is basically the same, doing the same things, thinking in the same way, acting in the same way, etc. To this situation here where everybody else around us don't think the same way, don't act the same way. Alhamdulillah, in spite of these differences, we are able to function together. Of course, we're not able to function together as effectively as other communities here, but yet and still, this masjid is a mixture. And this should actually be a point of strength for us. However, in many cases, these cultural differences become sources of division. We have brought a divisive mentality here with us. So the way in which we live here is that we come to the masjid and we mix with everybody, but when we leave the masjid, we only mix with the people from our culture. But still, alhamdulillah, the masjid has and does play a role in bringing us together. And among the talks that we'll be addressing will be the role of the masjid and the Muslim institutions in building a true Islamic community here. One in which the elders, the youngers, all have a critical role to play in the establishment of Islam in general and in the promotion of Islam to the people of this country. Culture, as a basic concept, is not different from Islam if that culture was produced by understanding and practicing Islam. When we understand, we have studied, we have learned Islam properly, and we practice it, there will arise from our practice a culture. Culture being a way of life, a way by which people live and define what's right, what's wrong, set rules for the family, for the children, for the community, etc. This is the role of culture. But when the culture is a product of our previous cultures before Islam, other than Islam, then now that culture needs to be assessed. Not that it's rejected automatically, because we do have in the Sharia, in fiqh, in the application of Islamic law, a place for cultural understandings. That's called urf. That the cultural understandings of certain things are taken into account when applying Islamic law. However, when the culture is something handed down or adopted or introduced newly, and the product of that culture contradicts the authentic teachings of Islam, here we have a problem. This is where the problem exists. And in reality, if we are to reform, to correct the ummah here, to address the problems that we face, fix them, and move together, move ahead successfully, then we have to take our guidance from the culture of true Islam. Imam Malik had stated that the latter part of the ummah would not be reformed except by what reformed its earlier part. What made the Sahaba great? What changed them from what they were before Islam, whether they were from the Quraysh of Mecca, or they're from the Aus and the Khazraj of Medina, or from other tribes, or even other religious backgrounds, from the Jews, Christians, etc. What changed that early generation and caused it to have a historical impact on world civilization? That is what we need to change, to fix, to reform, to correct our situation here in Canada, in Toronto. It's no different. It's not something special and new. It is the same thing which reformed the first generation. The first generation who the Prophet ﷺ called the best of generations. Khairun nasi qarni. The best of generations are my generation. They are the best. And what is it that changed them, that corrected them, reformed them? It was the Quran and the Sunnah, which the Prophet ﷺ left behind, stating that if we hold on firmly to them, we would never go astray. They would show us the way, and we would never go astray. So therefore, when we are to consider culture and authentic Islam, we have to understand that it is authentic Islam, Islam according to the Quran and Sunnah, as it was understood and implemented by that first generation. That is what is going to fix our situation, correct it, reform it, and build a community here that would change the course of history of Islam in Canada. It is that Islam. And each one of us who has come from different parts of the Muslim world, it is our duty here to look at our culture and identify what is acceptable according to the Quran and the Sunnah. What is acceptable is what does not contradict, what does not go against, what does not conflict with the Quran and Sunnah. If it is not in conflict, then there is no harm. But where it is in conflict, then we have to address and to fix. And we have to understand that when we start this process, and I'm sure many of you have been working on this process, it's not something which happens overnight. It is something that we have to struggle with, because the other people, members of our families, members of our community, or the people that we associate with, etc., if they are not of a like mind, thinking about trying to change the culture, to modify it in order that it would be in tune with, in line with the Quran and the Sunnah, then they are going to resist. It is the nature of people, whether it's because of fear of the unknown, or whether it's because of peer pressure, or a variety of other factors which make cultures strong influences on communities. For whatever reason, it is an ancient enemy of the truth. So much so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about it in Surah Al-Ma'idah, 5th chapter, verse 104, in which He said, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا الرَّسُولُ قَالُوا حَسْبُنَا مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. And if you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tell them to come to what Allah has revealed and to His Messenger, they will reply, what we found our foreparents doing is sufficient for us. What our foreparents were doing is sufficient for us. This is what the Quraysh and others, Aus and the Khazraj and others, were saying when the message of Islam came to them. Those who resisted the change. So much so that even the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Talib, he didn't accept the faith based on the same principle of our forefathers. We don't want to dishonor them. What they were doing, we have to respect. Respect of the early generation. In some cultures, this becomes worship. Among the Chinese and the Japanese, etc., they worship their ancestors. It's part of their religious rites to worship the ancestors. It's elevated to the point of actual ibadah. It's that strong. But it is something, regardless, that we have to tackle. Because the ultimate struggle which the Muslim world faces with the Western civilization is a cultural struggle. It comes down to culture. If the culture is not Islamic, it will be overcome. It will submit itself and go along with the non-Muslim culture. Muslims will be absorbed, their identity lost, and in a generation or two, they will themselves be lost. So it is essential for us to grasp this principle, to look at the various elements of our cultures and to weed out the harmful aspects for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, a lot of people say, well, what's the harm in these cultural things? Sometimes the harm isn't obvious. You can't see any obvious effect. However, it's a mindset. If we're not able to submit and to give up what goes against Islamic teachings in the area of culture, ultimately we will not be able to meet the challenge of establishing, in the true sense, a Muslim community here in Toronto. And as I said earlier, in a lot of cases, it is the cultural practices which go against the teachings of Islam, which give non-Muslims a misconception about what Islam is really all about. And this affects also our youth. As we speak about young people now going into the school systems where they may be surrounded by or in contact with non-Muslims, whether they are Canadians from Europe or they are other immigrants from other parts of the world, which are non-Muslim parts. And there in the school, Islamic practices may be made fun of, whether from the teachers themselves or from the students. And our young people who don't know, they don't know the difference between what is done culturally and what is done because of Islamic teachings. They become embarrassed and may end up leaving Islam over issues which really have nothing to do with Islam at all. So, when we have cases, for example, of honor killings, right? Honor killings. Back in some of our countries, this is a norm. If a girl, usually the honor killing is girls getting killed. If a girl, a woman, dishonors the family by having a relationship which the community or the clan or the tribe or whatever doesn't accept, then to protect the honor, the family will kill that girl or woman. Sometimes what the woman actually does, which they consider to be dishonorable, may not be dishonorable at all from Islamic perspective. I know in some cases which happen where a girl, for example, she develops a relationship with a male, and of course in Islam, outside of marriage, any kind of male-female relationship which reaches the level of physical contact is something Islamically not acceptable. But if one of our females did such a thing, do we have the right to take her life? See, maybe back home in our countries, this is the norm. It's accepted. Yeah. That's the duty. The father of the girl, the uncle, the brother, whatever. This is happening. It happens. It's not unusual. Some of our cultures, no, people don't do that. But some of our cultures, yeah, they do. And it happens here. And when it gets in the newspaper, and our children now are confronted by their classmates, their peers, etc., what kind of religion? You know? Because they're all learning in school that, hey, relationships are natural. They're teaching them things that really, Islamically, you know, we will have to answer to Allah for putting our children in such institutions where they get exposed to these kinds of teachings. So then that male or female in the school, they feel very, very compromised. They don't want this to be associated with themselves. They feel ashamed, embarrassed, belittled by their peers. Could drive them to disbelief. Just that incident alone. In some cases, for example, like in southern Egypt, it is the norm. It is understood that a woman whose husband dies does not remarry. That's it. For her to remarry is considered a major sin in their eyes. And there are cases where they will kill women for remarrying, widows for remarrying. So, though on one hand, the first case I was giving you here, it may be more understandable, but still, we don't have the authority to take into our own hands the Sharia and apply it. This is not our authority. This is beyond our authority. The honor of the family does not take precedence over the correct implementation of the Sharia. In Islamic law, in any case, people who commit fornication are not killed. So it's going way beyond, from so many different perspectives, going way beyond the bounds, the limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in Egypt, you can see, in southern Egypt, the culture from southern Egypt, this calls for taking of the woman's life. Look at that. In a circumstance in which Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself married widows. So what the woman is doing is sunnah. And she is being killed for doing as the Prophet ﷺ did. That is how evil culture can be. As I said before, it's not always so clear and so obvious. But in any case, once the culture contradicts, opposes Islamic principles, then we have to be prepared to address it. Our Islam should be clear. It is clear, it is simple, easy to practice, and as long as it's kept that way, people will be happy with it, they will be comfortable with it. But as long as we don't make these things clear to our young people, then we open the door for shaitan, for the evil forces to undermine the iman of our children and to misguide them to leave Islam. So, my brothers and sisters, culture, where it is Islamic, is important and it is good. And maintaining that culture, the Islamic culture, the true, proper Islamic culture, this helps to build and to develop the community, the bonds of brotherhood, sisterhood, which go beyond the lines that have been put on maps, dividing us up into different groups, when in fact we were one. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. That is the reality. There is no Bangladesh as a citizenship. There's a place called Bangladesh. There's a place called Egypt. There's a place called Malaysia. A place called Nigeria. But in Islam, is there a nationality? We have no nationality. Our nationality is Islam. And the evil of that national culture, so great, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had said, Man da'a lil asabiyya falaysa minna. Whoever calls to nationalism, tribalism, is not of us. Whoever calls to nationalism is not of us. And this is the challenge that we're faced with in our time. That we are supposed to be Muslim Canadians. Not Canadian Muslims. We are supposed to be Muslim Canadians, not Canadian Muslims. People say, well, what's the difference? Canadian Muslim, Muslim Canadian. There is a subtle difference. I think those of you who are reflecting, I think you can grasp the difference. And if you listen to the words as problems develop in Europe, whether it's Merkel in Germany or France or Theresa May in the UK, whatever, you hear them always saying, we want these immigrants that have come into our country, we want them to be Germans first, French, British, Americans. They're American Muslims. And when you say, no, we are Muslim Americans, they don't like that at all. They don't like that. And this is the point of culture. We should be Muslims first and foremost. After that, we can be anything. You want to attach some piece of earth somewhere to yourself? No harm. As long as you're clear that first and foremost, you are a Muslim. And that is essentially the message when we talk about culture and authentic Islam. Authentic Islam means that we recognize Islam first. It doesn't mean that we rebel against the society, where the laws of the society may conflict with Islamic law. We are not in a position of governance, so we are obliged to go according to that law, because that is the land in which we live. If you don't want to go in accordance or live in accordance with that law or other laws, then you go and find a Muslim country or another country which will allow you to live in accordance with the Islamic law first and foremost. That is the proper way. We make hijrah. We don't pick up arms and then say we're going to liberate Canada, make it an Islamic state. That's total nonsense. Total nonsense. So young people, if you hear anybody talking that kind of talk, you better tell your parents. That's dangerous talk. But psychologically, we should understand we may not have the choice but to be here, but at least we understand in our hearts that Islam is first. We're not in a position to change something or to reject something. We submit until such time as we're able to change it. It could be that the Muslim community gets together and they can change it, if they come together. So that should be our approach. But our children need to be raised Muslims first. That is how we should look at ourselves and look at the world. What brings us here tonight is Islam. It's not Somalia. It's not Syria. It is Islam. So that is the essence of what I wanted to share with you this evening. We take away tonight that culture has a place. The best culture is the culture which arises from the practice of Islam. And that's what links Muslims together all around the world. When non-Muslims ask me, well, how do we know what is the Islamic culture from the local, national cultures? How do we know the difference? How are we able to identify? I tell them, well, listen, if what you see people doing in one part of the world and everywhere you go in the other parts of the world, they're doing the same thing, know that that one is probably, I can't say 100%, but probably 90% Islamic culture. But what is local is what you see in one place, you look at so many other places, it's not there. Or you see it in one or two scattered places. It's not uniform all over the Muslim world. So when you hear about female genital mutilation, for example, FGM, some parts of the Muslim world, yeah, Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia. But so many other countries are not involved in it. India, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia. That's the sign. It's local. Then we have to look at those things. Does it have a basis in Islam? Or what? Of course, in the case of female genital mutilation, you should be clear that as a practice, it is what is being done in the name of female circumcision, in the vast majority of cases, is haram. It's haram. What is being done to millions of women in some of our Muslim countries is haram. Something very saddening, something very shameful. But it's not Islam. The point is, it's not Islam. So we have a general rule of thumb that you can use to explain to non-Muslims when they ask you that. How do we know then? Because we see Muslims doing it, we assume it's Muslim, it's Islam. But we say, does everything that a Christian do, is that a Christian means it's Christian? No. So similarly, that distinction has to be made. So the Islamic culture is superior. In the end, authentic Islam is our guide. It is what will give us the power, the ability to correct what is incorrect in our societies, to reform what needs fixing, improvement. And we have to put aside the cultural baggage that we have brought from our homelands, our parents brought from the place of origin from which they came, those practices which go against the teachings of Islam. This is a necessary first step. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he addressed these matters, he corrected them based on revelation, etc., in both the Meccan period and the Medinan period, cleaned up that foundation. And the result, what came out of that, the Islamic culture which evolved, became the foundation for changing the course of history of human civilization from that time until today. I will stop at this point, having covered basically what I wanted to cover. If you have any questions, I don't know how our time is running. I think we're close to the end. Huh? Leave the questions for tomorrow, but let me just take 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay? 1, 2, oh boy, more hands got up there. 3, 4. Okay? 1.
What is the ruling for attending conference in downtown Warsaw? Can you attend that conference here?
What is the ruling on attending the revival of the Islamic Spirit, RIS, conference in downtown Toronto? Well, it depends on your intention. It depends on your intention, depends on your knowledge, your understanding. I would recommend people go where more reliable knowledge is being given. But if our understandings, people who have not gotten, a clear understanding of the distinctions involved, end up going, we should not use that, as a basis for attacking them, etc., etc. Somebody says to you, oh, I went to the RIS and I had a great time. It's brother, haram, you shouldn't have been there. No, you better you sit and talk with them, okay, you had a good time. What were you doing? What did you do? Did you hear? And then if from what they are relating to you, there are things which go against Islam, then you try to clarify. You try to guide them. But if your approach is that confrontational approach, you're looking for an axe to grind, as they say. You want to chop somebody's head off. Boom. RIS. Finish you off. No, this is, given our state of affairs, it is not going to help the dawah. So, my advice, go where there is most reliable knowledge, inshallah, available over the weekend here or in other masjids in the city, other locations where they've got reliable people giving reliable courses or lectures, etc. But for some people it is saving their Islam. It may be for them, that's the only Islamic thing they do in a year. They get together there and they feel like a Muslim. I don't recommend it, but we have to given the circumstances that we're in, we have to be to some degree tolerant and use whatever information comes to us to help to benefit others. Try to look to see how can I benefit, to clarify for the person, etc., as opposed to get into a fight, a verbal fight. You know. Number 2. Go ahead. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I think that's a big topic, brother. That's a lecture topic. The brother before me went into it. You know, I think we have a day coming when we'll be looking into the bigger issues and discussing them as a panel. You know, I think on Sunday that we're doing that, if I'm not mistaken. So I would say leave that one to Sunday. You know, but as a general solution, the biggest solution is the establishment of more Muslim schools, Islamic schools. We don't have enough. This is one of the products. Right. That was you? Okay, go ahead, please. Wa alaikum salam. Just be clear. Integrating our values in the society. How?
Within your Islamic or religious limits, can you integrate the society which is around us, or shall we stay away from anything or everything that is not Islamic?
Well, okay. Because of the fact that we have a different culture, does it mean that we cannot interact with, function along with the society in which we live? Are we like the Amish? We go off somewhere and we don't have anything to do with the rest of Canada? No. This is not what Islam asks us to do. You know, the Prophet ﷺ was very clear. Al-mu'min alladhi yukhalitu an-nas wa yusbiru ala adahum khayrun min al-muslim al-mu'min alladhi la yukhalitu an-nas wa la yusbiru ala adahum. That the believer who mixes with the people and bears their harm is superior to the believer who doesn't mix with the people and doesn't bear their harm. So this is an obvious encouragement for Muslims to interact with others, because how do we convey the message? بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً, convey the message, even if it's only what you've learned from Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, if it's only a verse from the Quran. How do you do it if you don't interact? If you don't work with? So I'm not calling to isolation, but awareness. One of awareness, knowing who we are.
understand that in its theoretical sense, in its realistic, practical sense. How is that possible? How is it possible for people living in our day, in our time, influenced by our culture, able to look at the world through our lens and to interpret Islam and the way we're living in this day and age through the lens of people who are with the Prophet ﷺ, who had an understanding of the world, who had knowledge that was limited in terms of certain generally acceptable principles that everybody sort of generally accepts. For example, what I mean by that is there are hadith which mention that the sun prostrates. The Prophet mentioned where asks his companions about where do you know where the sun goes, and the sun goes and it goes under the arsh of I think the arsh of Allah, and it goes into a muddy kind of water. These are things that we don't find in the narrative, the Islamic narrative, that are elucidated upon. So you don't get an understanding of that from, at least I haven't seen anything that demonstrates that maybe people didn't take that maybe literally. For example, there are also ayahs in the Quran where Allah mentions that the fresh water and the salt water they don't mix, and there's a barrier between them. There are companions that believe that there was something literally, physically in the middle of the water. And so, are we to take their understanding, knowing what we know now, knowing that we can visibly see these sort of things, and that there's no way we can accept that as an interpretation. So when a person says understand the Quran and Sunnah from that perspective, it's hard for a person to say legitimately that's something that we can do. That's my first question.
Okay. We're probably only going to be able to give you that one. Let's just deal with the point here. One, when we say we understand the Quran and Sunnah according to how the early generation understood it, we're talking about in general. We're not talking about each and every specific point. Because individuals could have misunderstood. Individuals can or could misunderstand. So we're not dealing with the individual interpretations of individual companions. We're talking about the general understanding. The general understanding that when the Quran said, described Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as Khatamun Nabiyyin, that it meant he was the seal of the prophets and there were no prophets coming after him. That's the general understanding of general principles. So that if anybody else comes along and says, well, no, I'm a prophet after, I'm Ahmed, mentioned in the Quran, Ahmed, we don't accept that individual. So it is from those general principles, not each and every individual opinion, right? And that's why the opinion, even the scholars have discussed this already in the past. What do we do with the opinions of the Sahaba? We have the opinion of the Prophet ﷺ, his explanation, and that explanation has divisions amongst it, things which he identified as from himself, right? Which may be right and wrong. And the companions themselves, what opinions they had as individuals, and the general ruling that they give is that we take what is unanimous amongst them. That's what it's being referred to. We don't take the individual opinion of every individual companion. If we have other things to support, etc. So we're talking about a general understanding for implementation purposes. So this is the point that is raised. But the other one, because I don't want to hold up everybody, I was not even supposed to take any questions. So we'll just try to stay within what is acceptable, and afterwards you can chat with me, inshallah. Okay, so we'll stop here then. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك, and we hope to see you tomorrow inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum, jazakallahu khairan shaykhuna. Brothers and sisters, if anybody has any more questions, instead of just asking the shaykh directly, we would recommend you guys write it down on a piece of paper, or if you want, you guys can email it to info@abuhuraira.org, info@abuhuraira.org, inshallah. Also, guys, tomorrow, inshallah, the conference will start from 3 o'clock, Salat al-Asr, and during this weekend only, Isha will be at 8 o'clock. So, inshallah, please be with us here, 3 sharp, and we'll start after Asr, inshallah. And jazakumullahu khairan, wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.